The clock on the nightstand glowed 2:47 a.m., and once again, Jasmine lay alone in the guest bedroom of the mansion she called home but never truly belonged in. Down the hall, through walls thick enough to muffle any sound, her husband of 2 years slept in the master suite. They lived like polite strangers, sharing a name, a house, and a marriage certificate, but never a bed, never a real conversation, and certainly never love. Jasmine pulled the silk covers up to her chin and stared at the ceiling. The room was beautiful, decorated in soft pastels with expensive furniture that could feed a family for months. But it felt like a prison cell, gilded and gorgeous, but still a prison. Every night for 730 nights, she had gone to sleep wondering what it would be like to have a real marriage, to fall asleep next to someone who loved her, to wake up in strong arms that wanted to hold her. Instead, she had Ethan Rivers. Ethan Rivers, the tech billionaire who had built an empire from nothing. Ethan Rivers, whose face graced magazine covers and whose name appeared in Forbes lists. Ethan Rivers, who spoke to her with the same polite distance he used with his housekeeping staff. Ethan Rivers, her husband, who treated their marriage like a business transaction because, well, that's exactly what it was. The arrangement had seemed simple enough 2 years ago when her family's restaurant was drowning in debt and his company was facing a hostile takeover. His lawyers had explained that married men appeared more stable to investors and board members. Her father had explained that the money Ethan offered could save their family business and pay for her mother's medical treatments. Everyone had explained that it was temporary, just for a few years, just until both their problems were solved. No one had explained how lonely it would feel. Jasmine rolled over and pressed her face into the pillow. Sometimes she could hear him moving around in his room, the sound of his shower running in the early morning, the soft click of his door when he left for work before dawn. But they never spoke beyond polite greetings and necessary household communications. Good morning. Have a good day. Dinner is at 7 if you're home. Thank you. The most intimate they had ever been was when he had taken her hand at their wedding, and even that had felt like a performance for the cameras and guests. His hand had been warm and strong, but his eyes had been distant, already thinking about stock prices and board meetings and anything except the woman he was promising to love and cherish. She had worn her grandmother's wedding dress, altered to fit her curves, and had felt beautiful for exactly 10 minutes before realizing that her new husband was checking his phone during their first dance. The reception had been elegant and expensive, filled with business associates and society people who smiled and congratulated them while making mental notes about the merger implications of their union. That night, their wedding night, Ethan had shown her to the guest room and explained that they would maintain separate bedrooms for privacy and comfort. He had been kind about it, almost gentle but firm. This was a business arrangement, and they would keep appropriate boundaries. She had nodded and smiled and said she understood, then cried herself to sleep in her beautiful prison. 2 years later, nothing had changed. Well, almost nothing. Somewhere along the way, despite all her efforts to keep her heart protected, Jasmine had fallen in love with her husband. Not the public version of Ethan Rivers, the brilliant businessman and philanthropist, but the man she caught glimpses of when he didn't know she was watching. The way he talked softly to his elderly housekeeper when she was worried about her grandson. The way he anonymously paid for scholarships at the local community college. The way he kept a photo of his late parents hidden in his desk drawer, thinking no one would notice. She had fallen in love with a man who barely knew she existed. The digital clock flipped to 3 a.m. and Jasmine gave up on sleep. She slipped out of bed and padded barefoot to the window that overlooked the garden. The grounds were perfectly maintained, every hedge trimmed, every flower in its designated place. Like everything else in Ethan's world, it was beautiful and controlled and completely without spontaneity. A light was still on in his study downstairs. She could see the faint glow through the trees, and her heart did that stupid flutter thing it always did when she thought about him working late, pushing himself too hard, eating nothing but coffee and stress for dinner. More than once, she had left a sandwich outside his door when she knew he was pulling an all-nighter, but she always waited until she was sure he wouldn't see her do it. Jasmine pressed her forehead against the cool glass and made the same wish she made every night. She wished that somehow, some way their fake marriage could become real. She wished that Ethan would look at her the way other husbands looked at their wives. She wished that she could walk down that hallway, knock on his door, and find a welcome instead of polite confusion. But wishes were for fairy tales, and this was real life. Real life where beautiful African-American women married billionaires for practical reasons and then spent 2 years sleeping alone, dreaming of something that was never going to happen. Tomorrow would be another day of careful politeness, another day of sharing space but not sharing lives, another day of being married to a man who had never even tried to love her. And tomorrow night, she would lie in this same bed, staring at this same ceiling, wondering how much longer she could pretend that her heart wasn't breaking a little more each day. The light in his study went out and Jasmine stepped back from the window. Soon she would hear his footsteps in the hallway, the soft sound of his bedroom door closing, and then silence. The silence of two people who lived together but apart, who shared a name but not a life, who were married in every way except the only way that mattered. She climbed back into bed and closed her eyes, but sleep was still a long time coming. And when it finally did come, she dreamed of warm hands and genuine smiles and a love that existed only in her imagination. The letter had arrived on a Tuesday morning, red ink stamped across the front like a warning. Final notice. Jasmine remembered staring at it across the breakfast table while her mother coughed into her napkin and her father pretended he wasn't worried. The restaurant they had owned for 15 years, the place where she had grown up doing homework at corner tables and learning to cook alongside her grandmother, was 3 months away from foreclosure. "We'll figure something out, baby girl," her father had said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. James Thompson was a proud man who had built something beautiful from nothing, and watching it slip away was killing him slowly. Her mother's medical bills from the cancer treatments had drained their savings. The new chain restaurant that opened across the street had stolen half their customers. The pandemic had nearly finished what the competition started. They were drowning, and Jasmine felt helpless watching her parents struggle to keep their heads above water. That's when Ethan Rivers walked into Thompson's soul food kitchen. She had been wiping down tables after the lunch rush when the door chimed, and she looked up to see a man in an expensive suit, scanning the dining room like he was evaluating real estate. He was tall, with dark hair and eyes that missed nothing, and something about the way he moved suggested power and control. Jasmine had served plenty of business people over the years, but this one felt different. "Are you open?" he asked, and his voice was deep and smooth with just a hint of an accent she couldn't place. "Always," she replied, grabbing a menu. "Table for one?" He nodded and followed her to a booth by the window. She noticed that he chose to sit facing the door, and that his eyes continued to scan the restaurant even as he pretended to read the menu. Whatever had brought him here, it wasn't just hunger for her father's famous fried chicken. "I'll have the catfish plate," he said, handing back the menu. "And sweet tea. Good choice. Dad makes the best catfish in the city. Your father owns this place?" Something in his tone made her cautious. 25 years next month. "Why?" "Just curious. It's a nice establishment. Good location." Jasmine felt a chill run down her spine. She had heard those words before from developers and investors who circled struggling businesses like vultures. "I'll get your order started." She retreated to the kitchen, where her father was manning the fryers and her mother was prepping vegetables despite the doctor's orders to rest. "Dad, there's a man out there asking about the restaurant. Expensive suit, asking too many questions." James wiped his hands on his apron and peered through the service window. "Don't know him. But he's got that look." "What look?" "The look of a man who buys things." The stranger ate his meal slowly, savoring each bite like he was analyzing it. When Jasmine brought his check, he left a $100 tip on a $25 meal. "The food was excellent," he said, standing to leave. "Please give my compliments to the chef." He was almost to the door when he turned back. "Miss Thompson? Might I have a word in private?" Her father emerged from the kitchen, suddenly protective. "Anything you have to say to my daughter, you can say to me." The man smiled, and for the first time it seemed genuine. "Of course. I'm Ethan Rivers. I believe we have some mutual interests to discuss." The name hit like a thunderbolt. Everyone in the city knew Ethan Rivers, the tech mogul who had built a software empire before he was 30. Forbes called him one of the most eligible bachelors in America. Business magazines wrote articles about his innovative management style and his meteoric rise from middle-class origins to billionaire status. And he was standing in their failing restaurant, looking at Jasmine like she was the answer to a question she didn't understand. "I have a proposition for your family," he continued, his voice calm and businesslike. "One that could solve your financial difficulties and help me with a business problem of my own." That's how Jasmine learned about hostile takeovers and board perceptions and the strange world of corporate politics where a bachelor billionaire was seen as unstable and reckless. Ethan's company was facing a potential buyout from competitors who argued that his single status made him unreliable and prone to impulsive decisions. "I need a wife," he had explained with the same tone he might use to discuss hiring an accountant. "Someone respectable, intelligent, and willing to maintain appropriate boundaries. In exchange, I'm prepared to pay off your family's debts, cover all medical expenses, and provide a generous monthly allowance." The number he mentioned was more money than Jasmine had ever imagined having. Enough to save the restaurant, pay for her mother's treatments, and secure her family's future for generations. It would be a business arrangement, he continued. Marriage in name only with a predetermined end date. 2 years should be sufficient to stabilize my company's position and resolve your family's financial crisis. Jasmine had stared at him in shock. You're asking me to marry you. I'm offering you a mutually beneficial contract. But we don't even know each other. We know enough. You're clearly devoted to your family, responsible, and capable of handling social obligations. I'm financially stable and willing to fulfill my part of the agreement. Personal compatibility isn't necessary for this type of arrangement. Her parents had looked at each other across the table, decades of marriage allowing them to communicate without words. Finally, her father spoke. What would this marriage look like day to day? Separate bedrooms, separate lives for the most part. Some public appearances together for social and business functions. Discretion and professionalism at all times. And after 2 years? A quiet divorce. Mrs. Rivers would receive a substantial settlement, and both parties would be free to pursue their own interests. Mrs. Rivers. The title had sounded foreign and impossible. That night, Jasmine had lain awake thinking about her mother's tired face, her father's worried sighs, and the final notice letter sitting on the kitchen counter. She thought about her dreams of opening her own restaurant someday, dreams that seemed impossible without her family's support and guidance. She also thought about Ethan Rivers and the way his eyes had softened slightly when he talked about his own parents, both dead in a car accident when he was in college. There had been something underneath his businesslike exterior, something lonely and carefully hidden. 3 days later, she had called the number on his business card and said yes. The wedding had been planned with corporate efficiency. A designer dress that fit perfectly after just one alteration. A reception at the city's most exclusive hotel. Flowers that cost more than most people's cars. Everything beautiful and perfect and completely impersonal. Standing at the altar, looking into Ethan's handsome face as he recited vows they had both memorized from a script his lawyers provided, Jasmine had felt like she was watching someone else's life. This couldn't be real. She couldn't be marrying a billionaire she barely knew to save her family's restaurant. But when he had taken her hand to slip on the ring, his fingers had been warm and steady, and for just a moment, she had let herself imagine that the tenderness in his touch was real. I promise to respect and support you, he had said, his voice carrying clearly through the church. I promise to stand by your side, she had replied, meaning every word even though she knew he would never let her close enough to truly support him. The kiss had been brief and chaste, appropriate for the cameras and completely devastating for her heart. That first night in the mansion, standing in the guest bedroom doorway as he explained the household schedule and her social obligations, Jasmine had realized that she had married a stranger who intended to keep her at arm's length for the next 2 years. She had agreed to a business arrangement, but somewhere between the proposal and the wedding, she had started hoping for something more. Looking at Ethan now, 2 years later, she wondered if that hope had been her biggest mistake. The routine had become as predictable as clockwork. Every morning at exactly 6:15, Jasmine would hear the shower running in Ethan's bathroom. By 6:45 she would smell coffee brewing downstairs, the expensive blend he had shipped in from some small roastery in Seattle. At 7 o'clock she would hear his car pulling out of the circular driveway, and she would be alone in the mansion until well after dark. She had tried, in those early weeks, to establish some kind of normal interaction. She would get up early and make breakfast thinking they could at least share a meal like civilized people. But Ethan had politely declined, explaining that he preferred to eat at the office. She had offered to pack him lunch, but he had contracts with several restaurants for business meetings. She had suggested they have dinner together on weekends, and he had agreed in principle but was always called away by some urgent business matter. After a month of rejections, Jasmine had stopped trying. Now, 2 years later, she had her own routine. She woke up when she wanted to, usually around 8 o'clock, and had breakfast in the sunny kitchen that was bigger than her family's entire apartment had been. She read the news on her tablet, scrolled through social media, and tried not to notice how often Ethan's name appeared in business headlines. Most days she drove into the city to help at the restaurant. The money from her marriage had saved Thompson's Soul Food Kitchen, and business was better than ever. Her parents had been able to hire additional staff, expand the menu, and even opened a small catering business. Her mother's cancer was in remission, and the worry lines around her father's eyes had faded. The arrangement was working perfectly for everyone except Jasmine. "You look sad, baby girl," her mother said one afternoon as they prepped vegetables for the dinner rush. "This marriage isn't making you happy." Jasmine focused on dicing onions, grateful that the tears in her eyes had a reasonable explanation. "I'm fine, Mama. Don't lie to your mother. I can see it in your eyes. You're lonely. It's what we agreed to. Ethan has his life, I have mine. That's not a marriage, that's a business partnership." "That's exactly what it is." Her mother set down her knife and turned to face her daughter fully. "What's he like when you're alone together?" "We're never alone together." "Not really. We live in the same house, but we might as well be on different planets." "Does he treat you badly?" "No, never. He's always polite, always respectful. He just doesn't see me. I'm like a piece of furniture to him. Expensive furniture that he takes good care of, but furniture all the same." "Have you tried talking to him?" Jasmine laughed, but there was no humor in it. "About what? The weather? His work? My work? We've exhausted all the safe topics. Anything deeper than surface pleasantries might suggest that we're actually married instead of just business partners sharing a house." The truth was more complicated than she could explain to her mother. She had tried in small ways to connect with Ethan. She had learned his coffee preferences and made sure his favorite blend was always stocked. She had noticed that he worked late most nights and had taken to leaving snacks outside his study door. She had observed that he preferred his shirts pressed a certain way and had quietly made arrangements with the housekeeper to ensure they were done to his specifications. But Ethan never acknowledged these small kindnesses. If he noticed them at all, he gave no sign. The snacks disappeared, but he never thanked her. His shirts were perfect, but he never mentioned the improvement. It was like living with a ghost who occasionally left evidence of his presence but never actually appeared. The social obligations were the worst part. Once or twice a month, Ethan would inform her that they needed to attend some function together. A charity gala, a business dinner, a society wedding. She would dress carefully in designer clothes he had purchased for her, and they would arrive together looking like the perfect power couple. And for a few hours, Jasmine would get to pretend that they were real. Ethan was a different person at these events. Still reserved, still controlled, but he would place his hand on the small of her back when introducing her to people. He would listen attentively when she spoke, ask follow-up questions, laugh at her jokes. He would dance with her when protocol required it, holding her just close enough to be convincing but not close enough to be intimate. Those evenings were torture because they showed her what she was missing the rest of the time. For a few precious hours, she got to experience what it might be like to be married to a man who actually cared about her thoughts and feelings. Then they would drive home in comfortable silence, he would thank her for accompanying him, and they would retreat to their separate bedrooms like the strangers they really were. The worst part was that she was starting to catch glimpses of the real Ethan beneath the polite facade. Last month, she had seen him through the study window, head in his hands, looking defeated and exhausted. She had wanted desperately to go to him, to offer comfort or at least a sympathetic ear, but she knew he would only withdraw further if she tried. 2 weeks ago, she had overheard him on a phone call with someone from his childhood, his voice warmer and more animated than she had ever heard it. He had been laughing, actually laughing, and the sound had been so beautiful that she had stood frozen in the hallway just listening to it. And just last week, she had found him in the garden at dawn, sitting on a bench with a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise with an expression of such profound loneliness that it had taken her breath away. She had backed away without him seeing her, but the image had haunted her for days. There was a real person underneath all that careful control, a man who had feelings and fears and probably dreams just like everyone else. But he kept that man locked away from her as surely as if he were behind prison walls. Sometimes Jasmine wondered if the isolation was as hard on him as it was on her. Did he ever wish things were different? Did he ever look at real couples and wonder what it would be like to share his life with someone? Did he ever think about her at all when they weren't in the same room? The questions tormented her because she knew she would never have the courage to ask them, and he would never volunteer the answers. They were trapped in this polite prison of their own making, two people who had agreed to share a life without actually living it. "Maybe you should talk to him," her mother suggested gently. "Maybe he's as lonely as you are." Jasmine shook her head. "He's not lonely, Mama. He's exactly where he wants to be. This arrangement works perfectly for him. He gets the social stability he needs without any of the emotional complications of a real marriage." But even as she said the words, she wondered if they were true. Because sometimes, when she caught him off guard, she thought she saw something in his eyes that looked an awful lot like longing. The invitation had arrived 3 weeks ago, embossed in gold on heavy cardstock that probably cost more than most people spent on groceries. The annual Children's Hospital Benefit Gala, one of the city's most prestigious charity events, where the wealthy gathered to write large checks and feel good about themselves while wearing clothes that cost more than most people made in a year. "We'll need to attend this one," Ethan had said, sliding the invitation across the breakfast bar where Jasmine was eating her morning toast. It was one of the rare occasions when their schedules had overlapped enough for them to be in the kitchen at the same time. "Of course," she had replied, not bothering to hide her lack of enthusiasm. These events were always the same. A few hours of playing the perfect couple followed by the long, silent ride home and their return to separate lives. But this gala felt different from the moment they arrived. Maybe it was the setting, the children's hospital lobby transformed into a wonderland of twinkling lights and elegant decorations. Maybe it was the cause itself, something that clearly mattered more to Ethan than the usual corporate networking events. Or maybe it was the way Ethan's hand lingered on her back when he helped her out of the car, his touch warmer and more protective than usual. "You look beautiful," he said quietly as they walked toward the entrance, and something in his voice made her look at him in surprise. He was looking at her like he was really seeing her, not just going through the motions of being an attentive husband. Jasmine had chosen her dress carefully, a deep emerald green that complemented her dark skin and brought out the gold flecks in her brown eyes. The gown was elegant but not ostentatious, sophisticated but not trying too hard. She had wanted to look like she belonged in his world at least for one night. "Thank you," she replied, and felt her cheeks warm when his eyes lingered on her face. Inside, the usual crowd of society figures and business leaders mingled over champagne and carefully arranged appetizers. But Jasmine noticed that Ethan was greeted differently here than at other events. People approached him with genuine warmth, not just the calculating friendliness of potential business partners. "Ethan, I was hoping you'd be here tonight," called out an older woman in a silver gown, making her way through the crowd with obvious determination. "Mrs. Patterson," Ethan replied, and there was real affection in his voice. "How are the renovations coming along?" "Beautifully, thanks to your generous contribution. The new pediatric wing is going to be incredible." She turned to Jasmine with a warm smile. "And you must be Mrs. Rivers. I've heard so much about you." Jasmine was surprised to realize that Mrs. Patterson seemed to actually know things about her, not just the polite acknowledgement she usually received at these events. They talked for several minutes about her family's restaurant and her mother's recovery, and Mrs. Patterson's interest seemed genuine rather than obligatory. As they moved through the crowd, Jasmine began to notice a pattern. People didn't just know Ethan as a wealthy businessman here. They knew him as someone who had made a real difference in their lives. A doctor mentioned the research equipment Ethan had funded. A nurse talked about the scholarship program he had established for nursing students. A young father tearfully thanked him for the experimental treatment that had saved his daughter's life. And through it all, Ethan deflected attention from his own contributions, focusing instead on the work being done by others. He knew the names of staff members, asked about specific patients, and demonstrated a detailed knowledge of hospital operations that went far beyond writing checks. "How long have you been involved with the hospital?" Jasmine asked during a quiet moment between conversations. Ethan was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. Finally he said, "About 10 years. Since shortly after I started making real money." "Why this cause?" Another long pause. "My mother spent a lot of time in hospitals when I was young. Before the cancer finally won. I remember how hard the staff worked, how much they cared, and how little they had to work with. I promised myself that if I ever had the means, I would try to make things better for other families going through what we went through." It was the most personal thing he had ever shared with her, and Jasmine felt something shift between them. This wasn't the carefully controlled businessman she lived with. This was a man who had been shaped by loss and had chosen to respond with generosity rather than bitterness. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I didn't know you had lost your mother to cancer. It was a long time ago. That doesn't make it hurt less." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw surprise in his eyes. As if he hadn't expected her to understand, or perhaps as if he had forgotten that she might be capable of understanding. "No," he said quietly. "It doesn't." The moment was interrupted by the announcement that dinner was being served, but something had changed. As they made their way to their assigned table, Ethan's hand found hers, and his fingers intertwined with hers in a gesture that felt natural rather than performative. Their dinner companions were a mix of hospital board members and major donors, and the conversation flowed easily between medical advances, fundraising strategies, and personal stories about the hospital's impact. Jasmine found herself genuinely engaged for the first time at one of these events, and she noticed that Ethan seemed more relaxed than she had ever seen him. "Your husband is remarkable," the woman seated next to Jasmine said during dessert. "The children's wing wouldn't exist without his vision and support." "He's pretty amazing," Jasmine replied, and was surprised to realize she meant it. She was seeing a side of Ethan she had never imagined existed: passionate, caring, deeply committed to something beyond profit margins and stock prices. When the dancing began, Ethan led her onto the floor without the usual hesitation. Instead of the careful, polite distance of their previous dances, he pulled her closer, one hand settled at her waist while the other cradled her hand against his chest. "Thank you for coming tonight," he said as they swayed to the soft jazz music. "I know these events aren't always enjoyable for you. This one is different." "How so?" "You're different. Here you're more yourself, I think." He spun her gently, then drew her back against him. "Maybe that's because this cause actually matters to me." "I can see that. The way people talk about you here, the way you know so much about the hospital's work, you're not just writing checks, are you?" "I serve on the board. I visit the ward sometimes, especially around the holidays. I try to stay involved in the projects I fund." Jasmine was quiet for a moment, processing this new information. "You never mentioned any of that. We don't usually discuss our separate activities. Maybe we should." The words hung between them, loaded with possibilities that neither of them seemed ready to explore fully. But as they continued to dance, Jasmine felt something she hadn't experienced in their 2 years of marriage: hope. Maybe there was more to Ethan Rivers than the distant businessman she had married. Maybe underneath all that careful control was a man worth getting to know. And maybe, just maybe, he was starting to see her as more than just a convenient solution to his corporate image problem. The evening ended too soon, and as they drove home in the soft darkness, Jasmine found herself reluctant to let the magic of the night fade away. For a few hours they had felt like a real couple, connected by shared purpose and genuine conversation. "The hospital is lucky to have your support," she said as they pulled into their driveway. "I'm the lucky one. Being able to make a difference in children's lives, there's nothing more important than that." As they walked to the front door together, Jasmine gathered her courage. "Maybe sometime you could tell me more about your work there. I'd like to understand what matters to you." Ethan paused with his hand on the door handle, and for a moment she thought he might actually open up, might let her past the walls he had built around himself. "Perhaps," he said finally, but his voice had already started to retreat back into its familiar politeness. "Good night, Jasmine." "Good night, Ethan." But as she climbed the stairs to her lonely bedroom, Jasmine carried with her the memory of his hand in hers, the warmth in his eyes when he talked about helping sick children, and the feeling that maybe, just maybe, their marriage didn't have to stay a business arrangement forever. The package arrived on a Thursday morning while Ethan was at work, delivered by a courier who required a signature. Jasmine almost refused it, thinking it was another business document that should go directly to his office, but something about the return address made her pause. It was from a law firm in Boston, and it was marked personal and confidential. She set it on the table in his study, but curiosity got the better of her. Not curiosity about the contents, she wasn't the type to open someone else's mail, but curiosity about why Ethan would receive personal legal documents at home instead of his office. In the 2 years she had lived here, everything had been carefully compartmentalized. Business at the office, the rare personal matter handled through his assistant. When Ethan came home that evening, later than usual, Jasmine was in the kitchen making herself a light dinner. She heard him go directly to his study, and then there was silence. Not the usual sounds of him settling into work, just complete silence. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. Jasmine found herself straining to hear any sound from the study, but there was nothing. Finally, concern overrode her usual reluctance to intrude on his privacy. She knocked softly on the study door. "Ethan? Is everything all right?" No answer. "Ethan?" She knocked again, louder this time. "I'm fine." His voice was strained, unlike anything she had heard from him before. "Are you sure? You've been very quiet." A long pause. "Just business matters." But something in his tone told her it wasn't business at all. Against her better judgment, she tried the door handle. It wasn't locked, and she pushed it open just enough to peer inside. Ethan was sitting at his desk with his head in his hands, the opened package scattered in front of him. Papers were spread across the desk surface, and even from the doorway she could see they were old documents, some of them yellowed with age. "Ethan?" He looked up, and she was shocked to see tears in his eyes. This man who never showed emotion, who kept everything locked away behind walls of professional courtesy, was crying. "I said I'm fine," he repeated, but his voice broke on the words. Jasmine stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. "You're not fine. Please, Jasmine. Just leave me alone." But she couldn't. Not when he looked so broken, so completely devastated. She approached the desk slowly, as if she were approaching a wounded animal that might bolt at any sudden movement. "What's wrong? Maybe I can help." He laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "You can't help with this. No one can." She could see the papers more clearly now. There were photographs mixed in with the documents, old family photos, the kind that came from a time when pictures were printed and treasured rather than stored digitally. And legal papers that looked like they dealt with estates and inheritances. "Is this about your parents?" she asked gently. Ethan's composure cracked completely. He pushed back from the desk and turned away from her, but not before she saw the pain written across his face. "The law firm has been handling my parents' estate," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "There were some items in a safety deposit box that they never told me about. Personal things that were supposed to be given to me when I turned 35. "What kind of things?" He gestured helplessly at the papers. "Letters. Photos. A journal my mother kept during her illness." His voice caught. "She wrote about me. About how proud she was, how worried she was about leaving me alone, how she hoped I would find love and happiness and not just success." Jasmine felt her heart break for him. "Oh, Ethan. She wrote about how she watched me building walls around myself even then when I was barely 22. How she was afraid that losing them would make me afraid to love anyone else." He turned back to face her, and his eyes were full of anguish. "She was right. You were young and hurt. It's natural to protect yourself after such a huge loss. Is it natural to still be protecting yourself 15 years later?" He picked up one of the photographs, a picture of a young Ethan with his arms around two people who were clearly his parents. They all looked happy, carefree, like a family that belonged together. "Look at this. Look how open I was then, how willing to love and be loved. What happened to that person?" Jasmine moved closer, studying the photograph. The young man in the picture bore little resemblance to the controlled, distant husband she knew. This Ethan was laughing, his whole face lit up with joy and affection. "He's still there," she said softly. "I've seen glimpses of him." "When?" "At the hospital gala. When you talk about the children you're helping, when you interact with the staff there. And sometimes, when you don't know I'm watching, I see him in your face." Ethan set down the photograph and picked up another document. "My mother wrote me a letter. She knew she was dying and she wanted me to have something to read when I was older, when I might need her advice." "What did she say?" He was quiet for so long that she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, in a voice so soft she had to strain to hear it, he began to read. "My dearest Ethan, if you're reading this, then you've reached the age where you might be thinking about settling down, about finding someone to share your life with. I hope you have found that person. I hope you haven't let fear keep you from opening your heart. I know losing your father and me will hurt you, and I know you'll want to protect yourself from ever feeling that kind of pain again. But darling, a life without love isn't really living at all. It's just existing." His voice broke and he couldn't continue reading. Jasmine felt tears prick her own eyes as she watched this strong, successful man crumble under the weight of his mother's words. "She saw right through me," he whispered. "Even dying, she knew exactly what I would do, exactly how I would react. And she tried to warn me against it." "It's not too late," Jasmine said quietly. "Isn't it? Look at what I've done to my life. Look at what I've done to yours." He gestured between them. "I married you and then locked you out completely. I've treated you like a business associate instead of a wife, and you deserved so much better than that." "Ethan." "No, let me finish. You've been nothing but kind and patient and understanding, and I've given you nothing in return. You cook my favorite meals and leave them where you think I'll find them. You make sure my shirts are pressed the way I like them. You ask about my day and actually listen to the answer on the rare occasions when I give you one. And what do? I retreat to my study and pretend you don't exist." Jasmine was stunned. She had thought he was oblivious to her small kindnesses, but apparently he had noticed everything. "I thought it was easier," he continued. "I thought if I kept you at a distance, if I never let myself care too much, then it wouldn't hurt when our arrangement ended. But you know what? It hurts anyway. It hurts every single day." "What hurts?" "Living with you and not really knowing you. Sharing a house but not a life. Being married to someone who deserves love and not being brave enough to try to love her." He looked directly at her then, and she saw something in his eyes she had never seen before: vulnerability, honesty, and something that might have been hope. "I think I've been in love with you for months, maybe longer, and I've been too scared to admit it even to myself." The words hung in the air between them, changing everything. Jasmine felt her heart racing as she processed what he had just said. After 2 years of polite distance, after 2 years of thinking he saw her as nothing more than a convenient arrangement, he was telling her that he loved her. I don't know how to do this, he continued, his voice still shaky with emotion. I don't know how to be a real husband instead of just a business partner. I don't know how to let someone in without being terrified that I'll lose them. Jasmine took a step closer to him, then another, until she was close enough to reach out and touch his face. We could learn together. What if I'm too damaged? What if I've spent so many years building walls that I can't tear them down? Then we'll take them down one brick at a time. She traced her thumb along his cheekbone, wiping away a tear. Your mother was right, you know. A life without love isn't really living. But it's not too late for us. It doesn't have to be too late. For a moment they stood frozen like that, her hand on his face, his eyes searching hers for something she hoped he would find. Then, slowly, carefully, as if he were afraid she might disappear, Ethan reached up and covered her hand with his. I'm scared, he admitted. So am I. What if I mess this up? What if you don't? And for the first time in their marriage, Ethan smiled at her with complete honesty, no walls, no careful distance, just genuine warmth and affection. Would you like to have dinner together tomorrow night? He asked. A real dinner where we actually talk to each other? I'd like that very much. And maybe you could tell me about your dreams, your plans for the future. The things I should have asked about 2 years ago. Only if you tell me about yours. He nodded, then surprised her by pulling her into a gentle hug. She melted against him, finally feeling like she was exactly where she belonged. Thank you, he whispered against her hair. For what? For not giving up on me. For not giving up on us. As they held each other in the quiet study, surrounded by the photographs and letters that had finally broken down Ethan's defenses, Jasmine felt something she hadn't felt in 2 years of marriage. Hope for their future together. The weather forecast had called for light rain, but by 6 o'clock that Friday evening, it was clear that the meteorologist had gotten it spectacularly wrong. What started as a gentle spring shower had developed into a full-blown thunderstorm, with winds that rattled the windows and rain that came down in sheets so thick that visibility was reduced to mere feet. Jasmine stood at the kitchen window, watching the storm with growing concern. The power had flickered twice in the last hour, and the backup generator had kicked in automatically each time. But this was the kind of storm that could knock out power lines and flood roads, the kind that trapped people wherever they happened to be when it hit. Ethan should have been home by now. His usual routine had him walking through the door by 6:30, but it was already past 7, and there was no sign of his car in the driveway. For the first time since their conversation in his study 3 days ago, Jasmine allowed herself to worry about him the way a real wife would worry about her husband. Their dinner the night before had been a revelation. For 2 hours, they had sat at the dining room table talking like they were getting to know each other for the first time. Which in many ways they were. Ethan had told her about his childhood, about the parents who had loved him unconditionally and encouraged his entrepreneurial spirit even when his ideas seemed impossible. She had shared her dreams of expanding her family's restaurant into a small chain, her plans to honor her grandmother's recipes while adding her own innovations. They had talked until almost midnight, and when they finally said goodnight, Ethan had hesitated at the bottom of the staircase. Thank you for dinner, he had said. And for listening. I can't remember the last time I enjoyed an evening so much. Neither can I. For a moment she had thought he might kiss her. He had taken a half step closer, his eyes focusing on her lips, and her heart had started racing with anticipation. But then some old instinct had kicked in, and he had stepped back, offering her a soft smile instead. Good night, Jasmine. Good night, Ethan. She had gone to sleep that night feeling more hopeful about their marriage than she had in 2 years. They were finally starting to connect, finally starting to build something real together. And now he was out there in this storm and she couldn't stop imagining all the things that could go wrong. Her phone buzzed with a text message and she grabbed it eagerly, hoping it was from Ethan. Instead, it was a weather alert warning of flash flooding and advising people to avoid travel unless absolutely necessary. She tried calling Ethan's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. His office line did the same. The rational part of her mind knew that he was probably fine, probably just waiting out the storm in his office building or at a client meeting. But the part of her that was finally allowing herself to care about him as more than just a housemate was genuinely frightened. At 8 o'clock, she heard a car in the driveway and nearly ran to the front door. Ethan stumbled in, soaked to the skin despite his umbrella and looking more disheveled than she had ever seen him. His usually perfect hair was plastered to his head, his expensive suit was ruined, and he was shivering from the cold. "Oh my God, you're freezing," she said, immediately moving to help him out of his wet jacket. "What happened?" "I was so worried. Traffic was impossible. Half the roads are flooded, and there's a tree down across 5th Street. I had to abandon the car about 6 blocks away and walk. He was trying to sound casual, but she could hear the exhaustion in his voice. You walked 6 blocks in this storm? It seemed better than spending the night in the car. Jasmine felt a surge of something she hadn't expected, anger mixed with relief and fear. You could have been hurt. You could have been struck by lightning or hit by flying debris or… Hey. He reached out and touched her arm, seeming surprised by her emotional reaction. I'm okay. I'm here. You're not okay, you're soaked and probably hypothermic. She was already pulling him toward the stairs. You need to get out of those wet clothes and into a hot shower before you get sick. Jasmine, I'm fine. No, you're not fine. You're shaking and your lips are practically blue. She realized she was being bossy, more concerned than their relationship technically warranted, but she couldn't seem to stop herself. For the first time in their marriage she was acting like a real wife, and it felt both terrifying and completely natural. 20 minutes later Ethan emerged from his bathroom in dry clothes, his hair towel dry and some color returned to his face. Jasmine had made hot tea and was waiting for him in the living room, pacing in front of the fireplace she had managed to get started. You didn't have to do all this, he said, accepting the mug of tea gratefully. Yes, I did. She sat down next to him on the couch, close enough that she could monitor his condition but far enough away to maintain some semblance of the boundaries they were still learning to navigate. I was terrified something had happened to you. Were you? He sounded genuinely surprised. Of course I was. Ethan, I know our marriage started as a business arrangement, but that doesn't mean I don't care about your safety. He was quiet for a moment, sipping his tea and staring into the fire. Outside, the storm continued to rage and another rumble of thunder shook the house. I don't remember the last time someone worried about me like that, he said finally. What do you mean? I mean worried about me as a person, not as a business asset or a source of funding or a networking opportunity. Just worried because they cared whether I was safe and happy. The sadness in his voice broke her heart. That's what people do when they care about someone. Is that what this is? Caring? Jasmine looked at him, this powerful man who commanded boardrooms and built empires but seemed completely lost when it came to personal relationships. Yes, Ethan. I care about you. More than I probably should, given our arrangement, but I can't seem to help it. Another flash of lightning illuminated the room, followed immediately by a crash of thunder that suggested the storm was directly overhead. The lights flickered and went out, plunging them into darkness except for the glow from the fireplace. So much for the backup generator, Ethan said, but he didn't sound annoyed. If anything, he sounded almost relieved. I'll find some candles. Jasmine started to get up, but his hand on her arm stopped her. Don't. Not yet. This is nice. Just the firelight. She settled back onto the couch, acutely aware of how intimate the setting had become. The storm had created a cocoon around them, shutting out the rest of the world and forcing them into a closeness they had never experienced before. I owe you an apology, Ethan said, his voice barely audible above the storm. For what? For the last 2 years. For treating you like you were invisible. For being so afraid of letting you matter to me that I convinced myself you didn't. Ethan. No, let me say this. I need to say it. He shifted on the couch so he was facing her, and in the firelight, his eyes looked darker, more intense. When I walked through that storm tonight, when I thought I might not make it home, you know what I was thinking about? I was thinking about how much I would regret it if something happened to me before I told you how I really feel. Jasmine's heart started racing. How do you really feel? Scared. Confused. Like I'm 15 years old again and trying to ask someone to prom. He laughed softly at himself. But also, hopeful. For the first time in years, I'm hopeful about something that has nothing to do with business or money or success. What are you hopeful about? The possibility of us being real instead of just pretend. Another flash of lightning lit up the room, and in that moment of illumination, Jasmine saw everything she had been hoping to see in Ethan's face. Affection, desire, and something that looked an awful lot like love. I'd like that too, she whispered. Would you? Really? Even knowing how bad I am at this, how much I'll probably mess it up in the beginning. We'll figure it out together. He reached for her hand, threading their fingers together like he had at the charity gala, but this time there was no audience, no performance required. This was just them, finally honest with each other. I don't want to sleep in separate bedrooms anymore, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I don't want to live like strangers. I want to try to have a real marriage with you if you're willing to take that risk with me. What kind of risk? The risk that I might actually be worth loving. The risk that this might actually work. Jasmine leaned closer to him, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I think you're definitely worth the risk," she said softly. And then, finally, he kissed her. Not the polite, performative kiss they had shared at their wedding, but a real kiss, tender and hesitant at first, then deeper as she responded with equal enthusiasm. It was the kiss she had been dreaming of for 2 years, the kiss that finally made their marriage feel real. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said, the words barely a whisper but carrying the weight of 2 years of suppressed emotion. "I think I've loved you for a long time, but I was too scared to admit it." "I love you too," she replied and felt something inside her chest finally relax, finally settle into place. "I've been in love with you for months, just waiting for you to let me in." Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside, everything had finally become calm. They held each other in the firelight, no longer strangers sharing a house, no longer business partners playing at marriage, but finally truly husband and wife. The morning after the storm brought brilliant sunshine and the kind of crisp, clean air that made everything look newly washed and perfect. Jasmine woke up on the living room couch with Ethan's arm around her and his jacket draped over both of them like a blanket. They had fallen asleep talking, somewhere around 3 in the morning, after hours of the kind of conversation she had been craving for 2 years. For a few precious moments, she lay still and savored the feeling of being held, of waking up next to someone who had finally admitted he loved her. But as consciousness fully returned, reality began to creep in. What happened now? They had crossed a line last night, but what did that mean for their day-to-day lives? Ethan stirred beside her, and she felt him tense as he realized where they were and how they were positioned. For a horrible moment, she thought he might pull away, might retreat back into his familiar emotional distance. But instead, he tightened his arm around her and pressed a soft kiss to the top of her head. "Good morning," he murmured, his voice still rough with sleep. "Good morning." She tilted her head to look at him, searching his face for any sign of regret or second thoughts. What she saw instead made her heart flutter. He was looking at her with the same tenderness he had shown the night before, no walls, no careful distance. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in years," she admitted. "You?" "The same." He sat up slowly, running a hand through his hair. "I should probably check on the damage from the storm, see if my car is still where I left it." For a moment, Jasmine felt the familiar pang of disappointment. Was he already retreating back to practical matters, back to the safe territory of things that didn't require emotional investment? But then he turned back to her with a smile that was purely personal, nothing businesslike about it. "Would you like to come with me? Maybe we could grab breakfast somewhere, assuming any restaurants have power." "I'd like that." They found his car exactly where he had abandoned it, with only a few small branches on the windshield and no real damage. The city was slowly coming back to life after the storm, with cleanup crews working to clear fallen trees and repair power lines. It felt symbolic somehow, as if the whole world was getting a fresh start. They found a small cafe that had reopened and spent 2 hours over coffee and pancakes, talking about everything and nothing. Ethan told her about his first business venture, started in his college dorm room with borrowed equipment and stubborn determination. She told him about learning to cook from her grandmother, about the way food could bring people together and create connections across any barrier. "I never knew you were so passionate about cooking," he said, watching her face light up as she described her favorite recipes. "There's a lot you don't know about me yet. I'd like to learn. All of it." The promise in his voice sent warmth spreading through her chest. This was what she had been longing for, not just to be seen but to be known, to have someone who was genuinely interested in who she was beyond her role in their business arrangement. When they got home, Ethan surprised her by suggesting they spend the day together. No work, no obligations, just time to continue getting to know each other. They walked through the gardens and he showed her his favorite spots. A bench where he sometimes sat in the early morning, a fountain that reminded him of one from his childhood home. She showed him the small herb garden she had started near the kitchen, the one she hadn't been sure he had even noticed. "I noticed," he said when she mentioned her uncertainty. "I notice everything about you, Jasmine. I just didn't let myself acknowledge it before." They had lunch on the terrace and dinner there too, extending the day as long as possible. As evening approached, they found themselves back in the living room where they had slept the night before, but this time the fire wasn't necessary for warmth. It was just cozy, intimate, perfect for the conversation that had been building all day. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and find out this was all a dream," Jasmine said, curled up next to him on the couch. "If it is, I don't want to wake up." She looked up at him, and the intensity in his eyes took her breath away. Ethan? Yeah. What happens now? I mean, with us, with our arrangement. Do we tear up the contract? Do we start over? What do we tell people? He was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing patterns on her arm. I don't know. I haven't thought that far ahead yet. I just know that I don't want to go back to the way things were. Neither do I. Maybe we don't need to figure it all out right now. Maybe we can just take it one day at a time, see how we feel. She nodded, but something in his tone bothered her. There was a hesitation there, a carefully maintained escape route that reminded her uncomfortably of the old Ethan, the one who kept everything at arm's length. Are you having second thoughts? She asked, trying to keep her voice light. No. Yes. Maybe. He sighed and sat up straighter, putting a little distance between them. I'm terrified, Jasmine. Last night felt so right, so perfect, but in the light of day I keep thinking about all the ways this could go wrong. What ways? What if we try this and it doesn't work? What if we ruin the friendship we're building? What if I hurt you? What if you realize that underneath all the money and success, I'm just a scared man who doesn't know how to love someone properly? The vulnerability in his voice broke her heart, but she also felt a flicker of frustration. What if it does work? What if we're perfect for each other? What if we've been given a second chance at something real and we're too scared to take it? I don't want to be scared anymore, he said, but his body language suggested otherwise. He was pulling back, physically and emotionally, and she could see the walls starting to rebuild themselves. Then don't be. She reached for his hand, but he pulled it away gently. It's not that simple. It could be. Could it? Look at what happened to my parents. They had the perfect love story, the perfect marriage, and then they were gone in an instant. One drunk driver and everything they built together was just over. So you're going to spend your whole life afraid of loving someone because you might lose them? I don't know. His voice was getting more distant, more controlled. Maybe that's exactly what I'm going to do. Jasmine felt her heart sinking as she watched him retreat back into himself. Ethan, don't do this. Don't shut me out again. I'm not shutting you out. I need time to think. Time to think or time to build your walls back up? He stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and staring out at the darkening sky. Maybe both. Last night you said you loved me. I do. Then why are you running away? Because loving you scares me more than anything I've ever faced. He turned back to her, and she could see the conflict written across his face. Because losing you would destroy me, and I don't know if I'm strong enough to take that risk. You're not going to lose me. How can you promise that? How can anyone promise that? She stood up and moved toward him, desperate to bridge the gap that was opening between them again. I can't promise we'll have forever, Ethan. No one can. But I can promise that I'm here now, that I want to be here, that I'm willing to take the risk of loving you even if it might hurt someday. For a moment she thought she had reached him. His eyes softened and he took a half step toward her. But then something shifted, some old fear taking control, and he stepped back again. I think maybe we should slow down, he said, his voice becoming carefully neutral. Maybe we moved too fast last night, got caught up in the storm and the emotion of it all. You don't mean that. I think I do. Jasmine felt like he had slapped her. After everything they had shared, all the honesty and vulnerability, he was going to retreat back into his safe, controlled world and pretend it had never happened. Fine, she said, lifting her chin with as much dignity as she could muster. If that's what you want. It's what's smart. Since when is love about being smart? He didn't have an answer for that, and the silence stretched between them, filled with all the words they weren't saying. Finally, Jasmine turned toward the stairs. I'm going to bed, she said. In my room. Alone. Just like always. Jasmine. No, Ethan. You've made your choice. You're choosing fear over love, safety over happiness. I can't make that choice for you. She left him standing in the living room, and as she climbed the stairs to her lonely bedroom, she felt like she was climbing back into the prison she had thought she was finally escaping. They had come so close to something real, so close to breaking through all the barriers between them. But close apparently wasn't close enough. 3 days of polite distance followed their almost breakthrough. Ethan retreated so far back into his professional shell that Jasmine wondered if she had imagined their night of intimacy and honesty. He left for work earlier, came home later, and when they did encounter each other in the house, he was unfailingly courteous and utterly remote. Jasmine threw herself into work at the restaurant, staying busy enough that she didn't have time to dwell on the ache in her chest or the feeling that she had been offered something precious only to have it snatched away. Her parents noticed her subdued mood but didn't pry, for which she was grateful. How could she explain that her fake marriage had almost become real, only to revert back to fake when her husband got scared. On Thursday evening, she came home to find a note propped against the fruit bowl on the kitchen counter. Ethan's handwriting, precise and controlled as always. Business dinner tonight. Don't wait up. She crumpled the note and threw it in the trash, then immediately felt childish for the gesture. This was their life. This was their arrangement. She had been foolish to think that one night of storms and honesty could change 2 years of carefully maintained distance. But she couldn't seem to stop herself from hoping. Friday morning brought another note, this one informing her that he would be hosting a business meeting at the house that evening and would she mind staying in her room or perhaps going out for the evening so as not to disturb them. The polite, clinical tone of the request made her want to scream. Instead, she decided to go to her parents' restaurant for dinner and help with the evening rush. Anything to avoid sitting in her room like a child while her husband conducted business in the house they supposedly shared. She was walking to her car around 7 o'clock when she realized she had forgotten her purse. The business meeting would be in Ethan's study, so she could slip in through the front door, grab her purse from the kitchen and leave without disturbing anyone. But as she approached the house, she could see lights on in the living room instead of the study, and hear the sound of laughter, easy, comfortable laughter that made her pause. Since when did Ethan's business meetings involve laughter? Curiosity overrode her good judgment, and she found herself creeping closer to the living room windows. What she saw through the gauze curtains made her blood run cold. Ethan was sitting on the couch, their couch, where they had shared their first real conversation and their first kiss, with a woman. A beautiful woman with silky blonde hair and a designer dress that probably cost more than most people made in a month. They were sitting close together, close enough that their knees were touching, and the woman had her hand on Ethan's arm in a gesture that looked far too intimate for business. As Jasmine watched, frozen in horror, the woman leaned in and whispered something in Ethan's ear that made him smile. The genuine warm smile that Jasmine had thought was reserved for her. Then the woman kissed his cheek, her lips lingering against his skin for far longer than any professional interaction would warrant. Jasmine felt like she couldn't breathe. This was why he had pulled away from her. This was why he had retreated back into his emotional fortress. There was someone else, someone who clearly already had access to the warmth and affection he had refused to share with his own wife. She turned and walked back to her car on unsteady legs, her mind reeling with questions and accusations and a pain so sharp it felt like a physical wound. How long had this been going on? Was this woman the real reason for his reluctance to make their marriage real? Had he been playing Jasmine for a fool while carrying on with someone else? The drive to her parents' restaurant passed in a blur of tears and traffic lights. By the time she arrived, she had managed to pull herself together enough to function, but her mother took one look at her face and immediately pulled her into the office. What happened, baby girl? I think Ethan is having an affair. The words felt strange in her mouth, partly because she wasn't sure she had the right to be upset about an affair in a marriage that was supposed to be fake, and partly because saying it out loud made it feel more real. What makes you think that? Jasmine told her mother what she had seen, and with each detail, the certainty grew in her chest that she had been a complete fool. Of course a man like Ethan Rivers would have other women in his life. Of course he wouldn't be satisfied with a business arrangement when he could have someone who actually chose to be with him. Did you talk to him about it? How can I? I don't have the right to be jealous. Our marriage isn't real, remember? It's just a contract. Honey, feelings don't care about contracts. If you love him, then you have every right to be hurt by this. But do I? We agreed to separate lives. Maybe this is exactly what he meant. Her mother sat down beside her and took her hands. What does your heart tell you? My heart tells me that what we shared the other night was real. That when he said he loved me, he meant it. But my head tells me that I'm being naive, that successful men like him don't fall in love with women they married for convenience. And which one are you going to listen to? Jasmine didn't know. She stayed at the restaurant until closing, helping with the dinner rush and trying to lose herself in the familiar rhythms of service and cooking. But even surrounded by the warmth and bustle of the family business, she couldn't shake the image of that woman's hand on Ethan's arm, or the easy intimacy of their body language. When she finally drove home just after midnight, Ethan's car was in the driveway, but the house was dark except for the security lights. She let herself in quietly and crept upstairs, but as she passed his bedroom door, she could hear him talking on the phone, his voice low and warm in a way that made her stomach clench. I had a wonderful time tonight, she heard him say. Thank you for being so understanding about everything. Jasmine didn't wait to hear more. She fled to her own room and closed the door, leaning against it as if it could protect her from the pain that was threatening to overwhelm her. She had been such a fool. For one night, she had allowed herself to believe that they could have something real, that the careful distance of their arrangement could transform into genuine love and partnership. But she had been living in a fantasy while he had been living in reality, the reality of a successful, attractive man who could have any woman he wanted and had apparently chosen someone other than his wife. The next morning, she woke up with red eyes and a decision crystallizing in her mind. She couldn't keep living like this, suspended between hope and heartbreak, never knowing where she stood or what was real. The original terms of their contract called for a 2-year marriage, and they were rapidly approaching that deadline. Maybe it was time to start preparing for the end. She spent the day researching divorce lawyers and looking at apartments, trying to figure out what her life would look like when this charade was finally over. The money from the marriage contract would be enough to start over, maybe even to open her own restaurant like she had always dreamed. But every time she tried to picture her future without Ethan, even the version of Ethan who kept her at arm's length, she felt like a part of her was being torn away. That evening, she heard him come home at his usual time, heard him moving around downstairs, probably wondering where she was. Let him wonder. Let him figure out for himself that she was done playing the role of the convenient wife while he conducted his real relationship with someone else. Around 9 o'clock, there was a soft knock on her bedroom door. "Jasmine? Are you all right? You missed dinner." She almost laughed at the irony. He was worried about her missing dinner when he had been entertaining another woman in their living room the night before. "I'm fine," she called through the door. "Just tired." "Are you sure? You seem to have been avoiding me the last few days." "Have I? I hadn't noticed." There was a long pause and she could picture him standing in the hallway, probably frowning at her unusual coolness. "May I come in? I thought we could talk." "About what?" "About us. About what happened the other night. I think you've made your feelings pretty clear about that." Another pause. "Jasmine, please. Open the door." She was tempted, so tempted to let him in and demand answers, to confront him about what she had seen. But what was the point? Even if he denied it, even if he had some explanation, the fact remained that he had pulled away from her the moment things got real between them. Whether there was another woman or not, he had made his choice. "I think we should stick to our original arrangement," she said finally. "Separate lives, minimal interaction. It's what you wanted. It's not what I want." "Then why did you spend the last 3 days treating me like a stranger?" She heard him lean against the door, could almost feel his presence through the wood. "Because I was scared. Because I'm an idiot. Because I don't know how to do this without screwing it up." "Well, you've definitely screwed it up." "I know. And I want to fix it." "Some things can't be fixed, Ethan." "What does that mean?" Jasmine closed her eyes, fighting back tears. "It means that maybe it's time we both started thinking about what happens when our 2 years are up. Maybe it's time we both started planning for the end of this arrangement." The silence that followed was so complete that she wondered if he had walked away. Then she heard his voice, so quiet she had to strain to hear it. "Is that what you want? To end this?" "I want to be happy. And I can't be happy living like this." "Like what?" "Like I'm waiting for crumbs of affection from a man who's saving his real emotions for someone else." She heard him suck in a sharp breath. "Someone else? Jasmine, what are you talking about?" But she couldn't do this anymore. She couldn't stand in her bedroom having a conversation through a door with a man who had shown her a glimpse of heaven and then snatched it away. "Good night, Ethan." "Jasmine, please." "Good night." She waited until she heard his footsteps retreating down the hallway, then quietly turned the lock on her door. Tomorrow she would start making concrete plans for her exit from this marriage. She would find a lawyer, find an apartment, find a way to rebuild her life without the constant heartache of loving someone who would never love her back. But tonight, she allowed herself to grieve for what might have been, for the brief moment when she had thought their fake marriage could become real, and for the man she loved who was too scared to love her in return. Jasmine woke up Sunday morning to the sound of frantic knocking on her bedroom door. Not the polite, measured knocks of the night before, but urgent, desperate pounding that had her stumbling out of bed in alarm. "Jasmine. Please, I need to talk to you. It's important." She grabbed a robe and opened the door to find Ethan standing in the hallway, still in yesterday's clothes, his hair disheveled and his eyes wild with something that looked like panic. "What's wrong? Is someone hurt?" "No, no one's hurt. But I figured it out. I know why you think there's someone else, and I need to explain before you do something we'll both regret." "Ethan, I don't want to hear." "You saw Caroline. Friday night when you came home. You saw her with me in the living room." Jasmine's heart clenched at the confirmation, but she kept her voice steady. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. And I don't blame you for jumping to conclusions, but you're wrong. You're completely wrong, and if you'll just give me 5 minutes to explain. There's nothing to explain. You have every right to see other people. Our marriage isn't real, remember? Stop saying that. The words exploded out of him with such force that she took a step back. Our marriage is real to me. What I feel for you is real. What happened between us the other night was the most real thing I've experienced in years. Then why? Because I'm an idiot. Because I got scared and retreated into old patterns instead of fighting for what I want. He ran a hand through his hair, making it even more disheveled. Caroline is my business partner, Jasmine. She's the CFO of my company, and she's been my friend for over 10 years. That doesn't explain what I saw. She's getting divorced. A messy, horrible divorce from a man who's been emotionally abusing her for years. Friday night was supposed to be a business dinner, but she broke down crying about her custody battle, and I was trying to comfort her. Jasmine stared at him, processing this information. Comfort her? She kissed my cheek because I told her she could stay in our guest house until her divorce is finalized. She was grateful, not romantic. And if you had stayed 5 more minutes, you would have seen her husband's lawyer arrive to serve papers, and you would have seen her fall apart completely. The world seemed to tilt around Jasmine as she realized what she had done. Oh God. She's like a sister to me, Jasmine. She's family. And yes, I should have told you about her situation, should have explained why I was having business meetings at the house instead of the office. But it never occurred to me that you would think, he broke off, shaking his head. Actually, that's not true. It should have occurred to me. If I saw you comforting another man the way I was comforting Caroline, I would have lost my mind with jealousy. You would? Are you kidding? I'm crazy about you. I'm so in love with you that I can barely think straight. The idea of you with someone else makes me want to punch walls. Jasmine felt tears pricking her eyes, but she wasn't sure if they were tears of relief or regret. Then why did you pull away from me? Ethan looked down at his hands, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet and full of pain. Because loving you terrifies me. Because the last time I loved someone completely, unreservedly, I lost them. And I know that's not fair to you, I know it's cowardly, but the thought of opening my heart completely and then losing you? So you decided to lose me anyway, just more slowly. I suppose I did. He looked up at her then, and she saw tears in his eyes. But I can't do it anymore, Jasmine. I can't keep pretending that this is just a business arrangement when every day I don't tell you how I feel is torture. I can't keep sleeping down the hall from you when all I want is to fall asleep holding you and wake up with you in my arms. Ethan. I love you. Not the convenient, practical love of a business partnership, but the messy, complicated, all-consuming love that changes everything. I love the way you hum when you're cooking. I love how you take care of people without them even realizing it. I love your laugh, your smile, the way you see the best in everyone including me when I don't deserve it. He stepped closer to her, close enough that she could see the sincerity in his eyes, the vulnerability he was finally allowing her to see. I love that you worry about me when I'm late. I love that you leave me sandwiches when I work too long. I love that you turned a house into a home just by being in it. And I love that somehow, despite everything I've done to push you away, you're still here. Jasmine felt her resolve crumbling, felt all the hurt and anger of the last few days melting away in the face of his honesty. I'm here because I love you too, you impossible man. I've been in love with you for months, maybe longer, and watching you pull away from me has been breaking my heart a little more each day. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for hurting you, for making you doubt what we have, for being too scared to fight for us. What are you fighting for now? For you. For us. For the chance to make this marriage real in every way that matters. He reached for her hands, holding them gently as if they were precious. I want to share a bedroom with you. I want to share my days and my dreams and my fears. I want to take you on a real honeymoon and introduce you to my friends as my wife, not my business partner. I want to build a life with you that has nothing to do with contracts or arrangements and everything to do with love. What about your fears? What about losing me? I realized something when I thought you were going to leave me. I realized that I was going to lose you anyway if I kept pushing you away. At least this way, if something happens, we'll have had something real together. We'll have had love. Jasmine looked into his eyes and saw everything she had been hoping to find there. Love, commitment, and the willingness to be vulnerable with her. This was the man she had fallen in love with, the one he had been hiding behind walls of fear and control. I want all of that too, she said softly. But Ethan, I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me that you won't run away again when things get scary. Promise me that you'll talk to me instead of shutting me out. Promise me that you'll fight for us instead of against us. I promise. I swear to you, Jasmine, I will never run away from this again. And then he was kissing her the way she had dreamed he would kiss her, with passion and love and complete honesty. She melted into him, finally allowing herself to believe that this was real, that they were really going to try to build something lasting together. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. Move into my room, he said quietly. Tonight. I don't want to spend another night sleeping apart from you. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Jasmine smiled, feeling lighter than she had in days. Okay. But I have one condition. Name it. We burn the contract. The original marriage contract, the one that outlines our business arrangement. I want it gone. Ethan smiled back, the kind of smile that transformed his entire face. Consider it done. We're going to write a new contract. What kind of contract? The kind that says we're in this for love, not money. The kind that says we're partners in every sense of the word. The kind that says till death do us part, and we mean it this time. As he pulled her into his arms again, Jasmine felt like she was finally coming home. After 2 years of living like strangers, they were finally going to be husband and wife in every way that mattered. And this time she believed with all her heart that he was going to stay. 6 months later, Jasmine woke up in Ethan's arms, their bed, their life, and marveled at how different everything felt. The morning light filtering through the curtains of the master bedroom painted everything in golden hues, including the man whose heartbeat had become her favorite sound to fall asleep to. Good morning, Mrs. Rivers, Ethan murmured against her hair, his voice still rough with sleep. Good morning, Mr. Rivers, she replied, turning in his arms so she could see his face. Even after 6 months of sharing a bed, she still felt a little thrill at waking up next to him, at seeing his guard completely down in these quiet morning moments. What time is it? She glanced at the clock on the nightstand. Almost 8. We have about an hour before we need to start getting ready. Today was special. The grand reopening of Thompson's Soul Food Kitchen after a month-long renovation that had expanded the restaurant and added a private dining room for special events. The renovation had been funded by Ethan's investment in the business, but more than that, it represented the joining of their two families, their two worlds. Are you nervous? He asked, propping himself up on one elbow to look at her properly. A little. Are you? Terrified. What if your extended family doesn't like me? What if I say the wrong thing? What if... Jasmine silenced him with a kiss, laughing against his lips. You're going to be fine. They already love you, you know. Ever since you convinced that food critic from the Times to come review Dad's cooking. That was just business. No, it wasn't. That was love. Love for me, love for my family, love for something that matters to me. She traced patterns on his chest, still amazed that she was allowed to touch him this freely, this intimately. Besides, you've already passed the most important test. Which was? Mama's fried chicken evaluation. She says anyone who appreciates good fried chicken the way you do can't be all bad. Ethan laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest under her hand. High praise from a master chef. The highest. They lay in comfortable silence for a while, just holding each other and listening to the sounds of the house waking up around them. So much had changed since that night when they had finally stopped pretending their marriage was just a business arrangement. The house felt different now, warmer, more alive, like a real home instead of just an expensive place to sleep. They had redecorated the master bedroom together, combining their tastes and preferences in a way that reflected both of their personalities. Jasmine's love of rich colors and textures had merged with Ethan's preference for clean lines and quality materials, creating a space that was both elegant and cozy, sophisticated and welcoming. But the changes went deeper than decoration. They talked now, really talked, about everything from their daily schedules to their deepest fears and biggest dreams. Ethan had opened up about his work, involving her in decisions and asking for her perspective on business matters. She had shared her own ambitions, her dream of someday opening a catering company that specialized in bringing families together around food. I have something for you, Ethan said suddenly, reaching toward the nightstand. It's not my birthday. It doesn't have to be your birthday for me to give you presents. He pulled out a small velvet box and Jasmine's heart skipped. They were already married, already committed, but the sight of a jewelry box still made her breath catch. What is it? Open it and see. Inside was a ring, but not an engagement ring. It was a wedding band, but completely different from the one she already wore. Where her original ring was a simple platinum band chosen by Ethan's assistant for its appropriateness and elegance, this one was clearly chosen with love and care. The band was rose gold, warm and beautiful against her skin, with small diamonds set in a pattern that caught the light and sparkled like stars. "Ethan, I want you to replace the old ring," he said, his voice serious. "I want you to wear something I chose for you, something that represents what we really mean to each other now. It's beautiful. Read the inscription." She tilted the ring toward the light and saw words engraved on the inside of the band, "Finally home, ER." Tears pricked her eyes as she understood the significance. "Finally home. That's what you are to me," he said softly. "That's what this is. After years of feeling like I was just going through the motions of living, you made me feel like I was finally home." She let him slide the new ring onto her finger, replacing the symbol of their business arrangement with this symbol of their love. It fit perfectly, of course, because Ethan paid attention to details like that now, noticed things about her that mattered. "I love you," she said, the words coming as naturally as breathing now that she was allowed to say them freely. "I love you too. More than I thought it was possible to love someone." They might have spent the entire morning in bed if not for the restaurant opening, but eventually, practical considerations forced them to get up and start their day. Jasmine showered while Ethan made coffee, and they met in the kitchen for breakfast like they did every morning now. "What time did you tell Caroline and Michael to be there?" Jasmine asked, referencing Ethan's business partner and her new husband, who had become good friends of theirs over the past few months. "Noon. They're bringing the kids, so Caroline wanted to make sure they had time for lunch before the festivities started." Caroline's custody battle had ended in her favor, and her ex-husband was no longer a threat to anyone. She had moved out of their guest house and into a new home with Michael, a kind man who loved her children as much as he loved her. Seeing their relationship develop had been healing for both Ethan and Jasmine, proof that love could triumph over fear and that second chances were possible. "I still can't believe how wrong I was about her," Jasmine said, feeling a familiar pang of embarrassment about her misunderstanding. "You weren't wrong to be upset. If I had seen you comforting another man the way she was comforting me, I would have jumped to the same conclusion. Would you have been as gracious about admitting I was wrong?" Ethan grinned. "Probably not. I would have been too busy being jealous and possessive to think clearly." "Good to know." They finished breakfast and got ready together, a routine that had become one of Jasmine's favorite parts of the day. She loved watching Ethan choose his clothes with the same care and attention he brought to business decisions. She loved the way he kissed her goodbye every morning even when they were going to the same place. She loved the small intimacies of sharing a bathroom and a closet and a life. The drive to the restaurant was filled with comfortable conversation and shared excitement. Ethan had become genuinely invested in the success of Thompson's Soul Food Kitchen, not just as a financial backer but as someone who understood what the place meant to her family and to the community it served. When they arrived, the parking lot was already full of cars, and people were streaming in and out of the restaurant's new entrance. The expansion had doubled the seating capacity and added a full bar, a private dining room, and a small stage for live music. It was everything Jasmine's parents had dreamed of and more. "There they are," her mother called out as soon as they walked through the door, immediately pulling them both into enthusiastic hugs. "My successful children, both of them." Her father appeared a moment later, beaming with pride and satisfaction. The worry lines that had defined his face for so long were gone, replaced by the joy of a man who had seen his life's work recognized and celebrated. "Son," he said to Ethan, using the title that had developed naturally over the past few months, "thank you for believing in us." "Thank you for letting me be part of the family," Ethan replied, and Jasmine could hear the genuine emotion in his voice. The afternoon flew by in a blur of introductions, congratulations, and the best food Jasmine had ever tasted. Her father had outdone himself with the menu, combining his classic recipes with new dishes that showcased his creativity and skill. The food critic Ethan had invited was clearly impressed, taking notes and asking questions that suggested a very positive review. But more than the business success, what mattered to Jasmine was watching her two families, the one she was born into and the one she had chosen, merge together seamlessly. Ethan was deep in conversation with her uncle about fishing, of all things. Caroline was helping her mother coordinate the dessert service. Her teenage cousin was showing Michael her college application essays, getting advice from someone who understood the business world she hoped to enter. "Happy?" Ethan asked, appearing at her side with 2 glasses of sweet tea. "Incredibly. Good. Because I have one more surprise for you." Before she could ask what he meant, her father was at the microphone on the small stage, calling for everyone's attention. "If I could have everyone gather around, please. We have something special to share with you all tonight." Jasmine looked at Ethan in confusion, but he just smiled and guided her toward the front of the crowd. Her parents were standing on the stage, beaming with excitement, and there was something ceremonial about the moment that made her heart race. "Most of you know that this restaurant has been in our family for 25 years, her father began. "It's been our life's work, our legacy, our contribution to this community we love so much. But tonight we're excited to announce that Thompson's Soul Food Kitchen is expanding that legacy." He gestured toward Jasmine and Ethan, and suddenly everyone was looking at them with expectant smiles. "We're proud to announce the opening of Thompson's Catering, a new venture that will be run by our daughter Jasmine and her husband Ethan. They'll be specializing in family-style meals for special occasions, bringing the warmth and love of our food directly to your celebrations." The crowd erupted in applause, and Jasmine felt her knees go weak with shock. This was her dream, the one she had shared with Ethan during their late-night conversations but never seriously thought about pursuing. "How did you?" she started to ask, but Ethan was already leading her onto the stage. "Your parents and I have been planning this for months," he said quietly, for her ears only. "The private dining room can double as a test kitchen for catering orders. The new delivery van is parked out back. And I've already secured our first 3 contracts: Caroline's wedding, the hospital's annual fundraiser, and believe it or not, my company's holiday party. I can't believe you did this. I believe in you. I believe in us. And I want to spend the rest of my life building dreams together." As the crowd continued to cheer and her parents beamed with pride, Jasmine felt like her heart might burst with happiness. This was everything she had ever wanted: love, family, purpose, and a future full of infinite possibilities. "So," Ethan said, pulling her close as the celebrations continued around them, "ready to build an empire together, Mrs. Rivers?" "With you? I'm ready for anything, Mr. Rivers." And as he kissed her there on the stage, surrounded by everyone they loved, Jasmine knew that they had finally found their way home to each other. Their marriage had started as a business arrangement, but it had become something neither of them had expected: a love story that was just beginning. The fake marriage was over. The real one would last forever.